Here's a quick look into today's episode.
No one really loves being cold and hungry and tired. I think it's pretty rare that people leave the Army, and when you ask them, like, why'd you get out? They're like, oh, JRTC was really unpleasant. I'm sure it happens, but it's a minority of the talented people. Most people who are leaving the Army ask them, like, you getting out because you're tired of going to training exercises? No, I'm getting out because the day-to-day garrison is grinding
And I
down.
think providing these kind of opportunities is a way to not only retain them, but to make the Army a better place and to have that bigger meeting, the process of trying to transfer data back and forth and pull it from different places to put it all in one spot. Before, most of the time what they're doing is like manually going and pulling it, trying to like decipher, process the information manually, and then put it into a PowerPoint so it could be in a slide that then could be presented to a commander.
I'll put it a little more strongly than I think Abby did. I think that we in the Army need to be the ones to build the solution. I think that it needs to be people who are still in uniform, not just because they understand the system, but because they have skin in the game.
Welcome to Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. In high-performing teams, the core to recruiting, creating, and retaining talent revolves around leadership. Motivated, values-based, inspirational leadership. Today's episode is with Remi and Abby Ponce-Pore. They will talk about their unique experience as some of the first at the Army's Artificial Intelligence Scholars Program at Carnegie Mellon, and now at the Army's Artificial Intelligence Integration Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. For leaders listening, pay attention to the things Remi and Abby say about what kept them in the Army. Inspiration, purpose, and making a difference. For everyone, open your mind a little bit and imagine the Army with the tools, software, and systems that Remi and Abby and their teammates are developing. In order to get to this kind of environment, it will take all of us, leaders, followers, and the new generation, to make what's possible a reality. And now on to the conversation. One of the first things I want to do is I want to give you guys a chance to just kind of tell everybody like who you are, right? Because it's one thing for me to sit here and brag about you guys. Here's what I will brag about you two guys, is that every time I told somebody I was going to do this in some way, shape, or form, some of the people that knew you, they used words like geniuses. They used words like the best team player I've ever had. I did not realize that Bailey Bolin Concannon was your roommate until halfway through that conversation. And then she tells the story about Aqib Saeed, who also, Remi, you and Aqib, we did that long run one day, and you guys told me about building capacity, and you taught me about running lots and logging lots and lots of miles. People like Aqib and Bailey Smith and Rocky Dubinis, every day a new picture comes up of him in Rome. Like today, I think he was at the Coliseum. This is your crew. Like, these are the people that I'm going to say I look up to. These are the people that are inspiring me to be who I am. Tom Boggiano's, the Brett Broncos, Connor Livingston, Ezra Jones, First Sergeant Cummings. Every one of those person that I just mentioned, when like they hear y'all's names, like their eyes light up and they talk about it. And that has got to be the greatest compliment in my world, which is if you're picking a small team of people to go do something, whatever that mission or whatever that project might be, and you're like, I'm not 100% sure what the project's going to be, how it's going to end up. And they start picking a team, and you guys are the kind of people that people are always picking for their team, no matter what it is. And there's no surprise when they use words like genius and physical freak. That's you guys. And so I know you wouldn't say that in your introduction and who you guys are. What do you want people to think when they hear your name and your name comes up?
So I was thinking about this, for the past few weeks, but today especially. If I had to pick one thing, it would be commitment. I hope that for the soldiers that I was leading and the leaders that I served with, they would recognize that wherever I was in the Army, I was 100% and then some committed to doing really well there. Yeah, not being 1 foot in the door. So I hope committed would be something that people would think. So I'm Remington Ponce-Pore. I go by Remi. Captain now in the Army, stationed out in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University, getting a master's degree. It's got a long name, but it's basically in data analytics with kind of a techie MBA feel on the side. Been in the Army now for almost 6 years, 5 of which were in the field Army, and then the past year has been in academia at CMU. I commissioned out of West Point in 2018. I was a biology major, the Grand Strategy minor, branched armor, got 30 days of leave, and then my first real Army experience was RTAC, which is taught by the National Guard at Fort Moore, what was Benning. and then immediately into Ranger School. Did that, learned a lot, learned kind of how to train and what makes training effective. Came out of that with a minor hand surgery, but no lasting effects. Although when I first woke up, my hand was so wrapped up in bandages, I thought I was missing a finger. I remember thinking in the moment, like, well,
Yeah.
at least Ranger School's over. Probably the high point after Ranger School was the Army reconnaissance course, what they now call Scout Leader course. They do a really good job, or at least they did when I attended in the spring of 2019, of giving you multiple times to drill the same skill over and over. And you can fail and then very quickly reset and do the same type of exercise under different conditions. And it just makes for a really good learning environment. And they teach you, and once you're proficient, then they test you. And it's just a really good model for an Army school. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I came off of that, got to teach pre-ranger to other lieutenants for about 2 months at Fort Benning. I had 2 months to teach, and then came to 214, where I served as a platoon leader and an XO for a little bit while you were the commander there. Each of those roles was broken up by a 3-month stint where I either trained for, competed in, or coached for the 25th ID Best Ranger team, which was an awesome experience and a privilege, and one of the high points of the Army. Maybe 2.5 years into my time at Schofield Barracks, coming off of Best Ranger, I was pretty beat up. Ended up getting surgery on my right foot. So it seems that every time I do something that has Ranger in the word, I get surgery on the side of my body.
It's a pattern.
So I've worked through right hand and right foot. We'll see what the future holds.
Yeah.
Got some time to recover as a staff captain, just because you have a little bit. You're an organizational leader. You're not a tactical leader. And so you get a little bit of time to recover, kind of rebuild your body. Learned a lot more about fitness after being injured than I knew beforehand. But after that, Abby and I we dated right before we left West Point and continued to date while we were both at Fort Benning. So we were both armor officers. Coming off Best Ranger, I had a lot more time to think and realized that like the best part of my life was the time I got to spend with Abby. So she came back out to Hawaii for a little bit to visit. And then 6 months later, we got engaged, and a year later got married. So to line everything up, as I was a year out from my time to leave Hawaii, I got married and realized that given the nature of our two career paths, if I wanted to be with her and we were going to be together, that I was not going to be able to do that if I stayed in Forces Command. So if I went to MCCC or if I'd gone to SFAS, which at that point wasn't so much of an option because of my foot, that we would probably be another 2 years in different places. Just in terms of your life, I wasn't ready to spend the first 3 years of my marriage on FaceTime.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Seemed like I would have my priorities backwards.
Yeah.
So applied to the program at CMU because that would allow me to be with Abby and also address some of the problems that I felt I could be a part of solving in the Army. Moved out here June 1st of 2023. And I've been doing school here, which has been really good. I hope that the opportunities I've had to learn and personally develop at CMU, I'll be able to take that and apply it pretty directly to the issues that I see in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the actual thing that we do, the problems that we solve will have an impact that has nothing to do with technology really at all. When I was 16 or 17 and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I realized I was fit but not the fastest, and I was smart but not the smartest. And that if I applied myself to something, that I could get really good at that thing, but there was nothing that jumped out as like, this is the one thing that you're really good at.
Mm-hmm.
And about the only place that really I had any sort of capacity or ability that was exceptional was in just committing to something and refusing to quit.
Mm.
And that's good in a young person. When you get older, you need to moderate that a little bit. And I'm learning that as I get older.
Yes.
You can keep pushing, but there's an edge, and they will say that the only people who know where the edge is the people who have gone over it.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've done that, it's kind of irreversible. So it's good to know that about yourself, but developing that moderation is important. West Point was awesome. Learned a lot there. Met the best people that I've ever known. Met Abby there when I got to meet her parents while we were still cadets. And her dad asked me okay, well, why did you go to West Point? And in a moment of clarity, I looked at this guy. First time I met him, and I said, well, it was 1/3 naive patriotism, and it was 2/3 a desperate need for masculine validation. And he started cracking up.
Yeah.
So I was, I think, 21 when I said that. But it was true. And I think that really what I was going to West Point for was a genuine one-third conviction and belief in our nation and in the ideal of what it could be. And there's a lot of people that, because we have an idea of what something can be, but it's not that, and they write off the idea itself. And I'm just not that guy. But I'm willing to keep pushing towards, like, we all agree that this is something good inherently. What sacrifice is not justified personally in pursuing that? And the other 2/3 were this constant push of, we know how to make people. And I think what I was looking for really was leadership from someone that I trusted and respected. Going into the Army, going into the military, you're really making a deal with yourself and with this idea of what you think will be there. Of, I will give you my youth and my effort, my pain, my body, my life if required, and I want to receive some meaning from that.
Yeah.
And I want to be somebody at the end that I respect. And I think that sort of pact, a lot of people don't say it or they can't articulate it, but I had 20 young soldiers and maybe 4 a little bit older NCOs. But most of the young guys that are coming in to be in the Army, they're looking for a leader who's going to take them from either scared or afraid or weak. And they're asking us, like, make me stronger, teach me something, lead me. And
some cases they actually are, without saying it, they're asking for you to finish raising them. Because a lot of people left their house, their mom and dad at 17, 18, 19. I left him when I was 17 years old. There's no way I was finished being raised. And so therefore I was raised by sergeants and young lieutenants, and they finished raising me. And now it's proven that a lot of kids are not fully grown up until later on in life. People aren't getting married at 16 and 17 years old anymore. Well, women are not having babies at 15 and 16 so that they can go work on the farm. Remi, we'll go to Abby here to do a quick, like, who you are, what you're about. And then what we'll do is we'll go back to Remi, like, what your initial experiences on, like, when you first got out to your first unit. What were your expectations? Were they significantly different than what you thought you were going to see when you showed up here in Hawaii? But Abby, tell what do you want people to think and know when they hear your name?
Well, Remi and I talked about this, and it was turns out a much harder question to answer right off the rip. I'm Abby Ponce-Pore. I am also an Army officer, also an armor officer. Remi kind of touched on a lot of the history already, but we met at West Point. I chose West Point, actually quite similar to Remi. We both went to summer seminar, although we did not know each other at the time. And I kind of fell in love with it and then made the really, really smart decision of only applying to West Point. I did not apply to any other colleges or universities, but worked out in the end because I did get in, graduated with a degree in math, and then went on my way to then Fort Benning, but now Fort Moore, for follow-on, and spent 2 years in the Force Army before getting an opportunity to go to a program called the AI Scholars, Artificial Intelligence Scholars Program, which is a pipeline to come work at the Army Artificial Intelligence Integration Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So what it looks like for officers is they send you to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh for 2 years to get a degree. There's 2 flavors of the degree. You can either go get more data analytics focused or a more CS focused systems engineering type degree. I did the systems side of the house, so I went pretty hardcore into the computer science world, which I had not had experience with beforehand, but ended up falling in love with it. And I've been in Pittsburgh now for almost 4 years, 2 years for the degree, and then a 2-year follow-on. Now I get to extend a little bit more because Remi is here as well, which I'm very excited about.
Hey, Abby, before you keep going just for a second, because that was the most humble way of saying, like, I got a degree in math and I graduated from West Point. And you didn't just graduate. I'm sure you were right close to the top of the class. I'm sure it was not just a math degree. because I did look at like your guys' Christmas letter, and in here it says, you know, your master's was in a master in computational data science at Carnegie Mellon. So like that's not just your average math. Bailey Bolin also let us into like you helped her with every type of Jedi math homework while you guys there, because you were doing the homework before they even taught the subjects. She was talking a little bit about that, and you had to do your homework just to see what you knew, and you already knew it, and you were already helping everybody the next day. So very humble way of saying.
Bailey might have helped Bailey in some math, but she was certainly helping save my soul in English and philosophy and psychology. So
yeah.
She had my back on that one, but I appreciate it, sir. It is a pretty rigorous degree that I got from CMU. It was something that I really enjoyed and became very passionate about, and that really helped me fight through the long nights and the late nights and the very sad girl hours of 2 a.m. for the 4th night in a row as I'm trying to finish a project for a class.
Yeah, Abby won't say this, but I will. She got unofficially invited back to do a PhD, not by the Army, but by the Carnegie Mellon Computer Science Department, which is extremely rare.
Yeah. And by CMU, you mean Carnegie Mellon, not CMU as in like Central Michigan University, which is where I got my degree, my second degree from. So CMU, not all CMUs are created equal.
I hope that people walk away from an interaction with me thinking that I'm a team player and I'll have your back on things. Like if you're going through tough times, like I'll be there and have your back and try to help you through them. So
that's such a common thing that we hear with the folks that I've been talking to. And Christy did say the other day, she's like, you need to start branching out a little bit, because the people you are always talking to are always like at the top of their class. They're the most elite of the people. And I can't help it, but that's the group of people that I'm gravitating towards, because I want to be surrounded by people that push me, that inspire me, that teach me something, regardless of age, regardless of rank. I can learn something from. And because of what you just said, was the reason everybody says I want to be known as the greatest team player is because you push yourself so hard, because when you do come to the team, you want to bring something to the team. You want to have a skill that I can share with the team. And that's why people like they misunderstand, why do you push so hard? Like, why do you push so hard to get that score on the ACFT? Why do you push so hard to get all these degrees? Is it so you can get these big accolades and you can put this piece of paper up on the wall? And that's not the reason people like you do it. You do it because when it's my turn to go back to the team, I want to help the team. And Remi, you were talking about, I want to get some of these skills so I can help the Army be a better place for people to serve and make it not just a more fun place for people to serve, but to make it more effective, to make us more efficient, to make us better at whatever it is that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I don't think I realized when I chose to come to CMU for this program, because I kind of did a flight by night in the middle of COVID to leave. I was on a rotation in Poland with my unit, and I got a chance email in April saying, hey, would you like to apply to CMU? You have a week. Here's the application. So I turned around the application in a week and found out a month later that I had gotten in, and flew out of Poland at mid to early June to have my butt in seat in Pittsburgh in July 1st of that year. It was an abnormal thing because I was with the very first group going through piloting this program. So it was extremely late and a little haphazard to get us all from all over the world into Pittsburgh in the middle of COVID, because this happened in 2020. So that was an interesting experience.
So we kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit. Like that was a really good spoiler alert right there, which is like, hey, here's who we are. Here's what we've done. Here's where we're at right now. So we talked at the beginning. We talked a little bit about like what you guys are doing right now. We'll get into a lot more detail on what you're doing right now and how we think that could help the Army, how we think that could help people. But I want to kind of go to the middle here for a second, and I want to talk about, all right, we joined the Army, we graduated from West Point, we go out to our first units, all right? If I get this right, you guys didn't have the exact same experience, right? Your experiences were a lot different. Remi came to Hawaii. Abby, you went to Fort Stewart. You went to 3rd Infantry Division. Let's talk a little bit, and you guys can go back and forth however you want, but talk a little bit about your expectations when you went out to your first unit, and then how were they different when you got there?
So I came out of West Point with naively high expectations of what the Army was going to be and what units were going to look like and what my experiences were going to be like. I had some trepidation about the challenges I was going to face, being a female in the armor world. I was still pretty early in the cycle for women coming into combat arms. I think I was year 3 or 4 of that cycle. So we were still pretty limited in scope in terms of where we were allowed to go. And there were still a lot of restrictions on the units themselves. So you had to have 2 leaders in place before you could start bringing in enlisted and things like that. So I had some trepidation about that. And that ended up being very unnecessary. I mean, I had no issues because I was a female in the armor branch, which I think is fantastic and speaks a lot to how much the Army has grown in that regard. And just seeing some of the people I worked with kind of start to change their opinions as they worked with me and they worked with the other women who were coming into the unit. Again, naively high expectations that were not met. I mean, my very first experience in the Army was showing up to start Bullock and then being told, actually, West Point never got you a slot for Bullock. So we don't have slots until December, maybe. So you're going to be snowbirding for the foreseeable future. That was a rough start. And it wasn't just me. It was about a third of the armor West Point lieutenants that came out that year. And don't really know exactly what happened. West Point just kind of sent us there. And then when we tried to reach back out to see what had happened, we heard nothing. Yeah. Got nothing back. Crickets. So that was right off the rip, just kind of a frustrating experience that left the whole ordeal kind of left a bad taste in my mouth on that regard. And then I continued on. I did eventually get into Bullock. I actually competed for a slot via the then APFT and got in a little bit earlier, basically replaced someone who had failed the APFT and took their slot to start Bullock early. Did Bullock, did ARC, Army Reconnaissance course, which was probably the best Army course that I also have been in. I did attempt Ranger School. It did not go well. As my battalion commander, when I got to my unit, said, you came out with a tail, not a tap. But I don't have a very good tail because I failed push-ups. So here we are. But that was kind of my betting experience. And then I went to Fort Stewart and got the opportunity to pretty much walk into a platoon position platoon leader position, not by any merit of my own, but because they were on a timeline to get women into positions, which was unfortunately there was a lot of policies I saw that they had in place with regard to how they were trying to get women into units that I think caused some problems and probably really disadvantaged units. I was again pretty fortunate that there wasn't a huge line for PLs at Fort Stewart. So I did jump one person, one male peer who had been there for an extra 2 months to take a platoon over him. And again, by no merit of my own, besides being a female, but I imagine that was probably something that caused a lot of consternation elsewhere. But I was fortunate to have a fantastic platoon sergeant, and I got to be on tanks, which was pretty cool.
When you back to when you were at Fort Moore and you guys, and maybe it's different for the two of you, but you showed up there and you had to wait for a slot. You had to wait, to figure out when you're going to class up and when you're going to start your Bullock, and then that sets back when you're going to move to Fort Stewart, or Remi, when you're going to move to Hawaii. and you go give Ranger School a shot. Was it one shot and that's it? And there was no like get back in line. There was no like let's put some improvement. Let's get you into our TAC where Remi is or something like that. How did that whole process work for you?
So since I was going to a heavy unit, the policy at the time was that I actually didn't have to go to Ranger School at all. And it wasn't necessarily encouraged for people going to heavy units. It was kind of an optional thing that I opted into because I wanted to give it a shot. And so I chose to extend my stay a little bit at Fort Moore, although not by that much, to try to compete for a slot, because I don't know what it looks like now, but at the time, Able had got a select number of slots to Ranger School, but it was first and foremost for anyone who was going to an IBCT, and then SBCT. I think they also were still getting slots, and then if you were going to an ABCT, you had to compete to try to like walk on basically Ranger School, and it wasn't guaranteed. I think for ABCT or SBCT that you would even get a shot at it. You had to compete, and basically the way that turned into was like being the best across the different Ranger tasks to earn your slot. So I did actually get to go twice. And I, again, not very exciting. I failed push-ups both times. Yeah. Basically I was there, I walked out of ARC and pretty shortly thereafter tried to walk on to, Ranger School, got in and then failed. And then they allowed me to stay for one more month to the next cycle to see if I could get through it. And, I did not.
Yeah. I want to
pretty boring.
The reason I wanted to bring that up is because a lot of times in the beginning of people's military career, whether it's a brand new private and they go to airborne school, or they go, or a lieutenant in your guys' case, and you go to ARC, then you go to Ranger School, because brand new privates are not getting chances to go to Ranger School when they first come out, but they do get to try things like airborne school, or they get to try, like my son, he got to try air assault school. And so what you think of, or you think of like the 75th Ranger Regiment, you get to go try and go to RIP, right? And we know the success rate in a lot of those schools is low. And so what you end up happening is at a young point in somebody's life, if the first thing that they have is a failure, or the first thing that they have is they didn't make it, it could be in some cases the first time that that's happened to them in their entire life. Right. But it also could be a really great moment for them to be able to say, hey, now's the time to pick myself back up and gain a little bit of strength and move on. But not everybody recovers very well from those kind of things. And so it's a challenge. It's different. It's something that can't just be overlooked as it's the same for everybody, because it's not the same for everybody, especially people that maybe didn't have a leader at the time, or a mentor at the time, or a coach that was there to pick them back up. And I saw that growing up in the Army a lot. I saw that as a junior officer a lot, especially in the 82nd Airborne Division, where half my platoon were young soldiers that went to the 75th Ranger Regiment and failed RIP, but they had airborne wings, so off they go to the 82nd. But they're already down in the dumps, and the first thing they experienced in their military career was not making it. And so it's important, I think, for people to hear those kind of things and understand that the beginning of somebody's career is pivotal to having some type of success, and leaders have to help those people figure out what is that small little success, those small little victories that they can have, so they can start to gain confidence in themselves and start incrementally getting better and better and better as they move on to the units. And so I digress.
No, I think that's fair. It was, I mean, I look back now and it is definitely something that helped me improve and get better as a human. But at the time that was really disheartening, especially to have a lot of confidence in many of the other Ranger skills. I've traditionally been a pretty strong rucker. I'm nothing compared to Mr. Sub 2 hour over here, but I've been very good at rucking. I've always been really good at land nav, compared to a lot of my peers. And I saw that even in the pre-Ranger train up. And so it was very frustrating to not even have a chance to show off the hard work that I'd put in other areas, but also then reflecting and realizing well, you didn't put enough effort into some of the other basics,
Yeah.
i.e. the RPA.
And all the other stuff that you did to prepare for Ranger School, like it still made you a better platoon leader.
Yeah.
And it still made you better at all the other things. So the preparation was absolutely not wasted. When you're trying to develop people, you want to give them small challenges that when they hit it, they're able to fight it and generally succeed. And you want ideally more successes than failures so that they learn, like, when they encounter that obstacle, they believe in themselves that they can overcome it because that's happened before. And the narrative they tell themselves is that I'm the type of person that they can beat this. I'm the type of person that gets this hard thing and succeeds.
Yeah.
And I think it's very hard if your first experience, and thankfully Ranger School wasn't the first thing that happened. So you had a track record of performance, and that was like one ball out of alignment on like others that were very successful.
For other folks, they didn't make it through the swim test. For other folks, it was the sit-ups. For other folks, they did everything, they crushed everything, and then on day 3, the 5-mile run would just always get them. Right? That was just that was their thing. That was hard to get 5 miles in under 40 minutes. For some folks. And so some folks, they smoked everything on that, and then they just could not find 5 points, and they couldn't find 3. They could not, they would panic in the middle of the woods, and they couldn't do it. Or some people just get injured. Some people have an infection. Somebody has something. There's so many dominoes that have to line up, for all those things to kind of always work out.
I had kind of an inverse experience to Abby. They spent the time to make sure that most of the stuff for the guys going into Ranger School in the summer was set up. So my first real Army experience was RTAC, which met all expectations of what I thought it would be. It was difficult. The NCOs were professional. They were extremely knowledgeable, but there was a pretty strong correlation between your effort and your ability and your success. Almost everyone who passes RTAC, they're someone that is going to be successful. And I felt like they did a really good job of having relevant training and relevant testing. So moving that into Ranger School, that met almost every expectation in terms of difficulty and discomfort. It's hard to learn in Ranger School because you're so uncomfortable. And one of the big things I pulled out of that, and there's other like articles written on this by RIs, the actual instructors, that you can make something a learning experience, and people can get another rep and they can reflect on it. And when you reflect is when you learn. Or you can make something really uncomfortable, and kind of what people just say is a suck fest, but one comes at the expense of the other.
Yeah.
And it's hard when you're in that environment to appreciate, okay, I made this mistake and this is how I can do it better, versus just immediately moving on of like, I made that mistake, but it wasn't, it didn't destroy me, or I didn't blow my chances on that go. So I'm just going to put it out of my mind now and focus on what's happening, in the next 40 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah, after that, in recovery, I was able to, by the happy accident of timing, I basically went from one course into the next with no more than about a week of downtime between each course, which was great as a young officer, to feel like you were learning, you're being challenged, and as you're going through that, you're improving. So a lot of that generally met my expectations of what I thought the Army would be like. It's your first experience of not being in either ROTC. If you're an ROTC guy, for me, it was my first experience outside of West Point. And so I felt like in the field Army, we had an enormous amount of freedom because you're much less regimented.
Yeah.
That first year, I felt really good, and it made me very motivated to be in the Army doing what I was doing. And so as I was coming into Hawaii, I felt good. A lot of the training I'd gone through had been something that made me want to be better or do better. And just was full of fire coming into Hawaii and ready to go 100 miles an hour.
How was yours, Abby, getting from Fort Moore up to the short drive over there to Hinesville, Georgia?
Yeah, just a quick trip across the state of Georgia. Didn't go that far. I felt like I had some fantastic soldiers, but I was just so frustrated because, Stewart is unfortunately not a great place to have 2 brigades worth of tanks. It shows, there was very little training that we could do and very little we could do to change that. There's one area in all of Fort Stewart that's large enough kind of to allow for any kind of platoon level ops. And even platoon level ops, it's really too small, but it's mostly swamp. Most of the training area is underwater, below sea level. So, I mean, my first experience was just like we spend so much time just wasting these like really quality soldiers' times for and not really accomplishing stuff, but at the same time, the work-life balance, especially on the officer side, was just absurd. I mean, my company commander regularly slept at his office because he would work so late, and he lived in Savannah, Georgia, so he wouldn't drive the hour home at, 8 or 9 o'clock at night to like drive back in at 4 in the morning so that he could get in and like do some work before the morning meeting and PT. And like that was generally rewarded. Like that kind of like just constant go, go, go was like rewarded. But again, we weren't training all that much. We weren't preparing to, I mean, at the time, we weren't preparing to go on a rotation. We were going to go to Poland for Defender 2020, but we were supposed to go for a couple of weeks. That changed once COVID happened because we were the only ones over there. So they put us on a rotation. We were supposed to be there for a few weeks. And that was really the extent of what we had in the like long-term plans. There really wasn't that much else going on for our brigade, but we were acting like we were about to go get deployed to a combat zone in terms of like the paperwork and the bureaucracy and like that side of the house. But then we weren't equally doing that with training. And there was just this huge disconnect. So I just felt like I was chained to my laptop all the time because that's what I had to do, and working late because that's what I was supposed to do. And meanwhile, my soldiers, with like a few exceptions, were largely just sitting around in the motor pool waiting for parts to come in so that the mechanics could maybe fix our tanks. But I was just kind of like generally disappointed with what the real Army seemed to look like from my anecdotal little keyhole that I was looking through. The other thing that I saw a lot that frustrated me was the idea that short-term successes tended to be more valuable than long-term organizational change or long-term decisions that would not reap any immediate rewards, but in the long term would be better for the overall organization, the company, the battalion, the brigade. And like those choices did not seem to be made. Of course, again, this is anecdotal from one PL/XO who was there for a year. Like all these frustrations were definitely building up. And yeah, third ID was not my place, not my happy place.
Yeah. But it's important. And as much as you say, like, that's just your optic, right? That's the optic of a significantly talented person who comes out of school, who is ready to help the Army, ready to solve problems, ready to get out there and lead. And this is what you run into, right? And so it's important to, like, not just the good things are the same things that everybody's seeing. Like, there's a lot of people that are probably seeing what you saw, whether it's people that were also on that base or people at other bases across the Army. And so it's important for people to hear about those things. Remi?
Just one thought on that, and then I'll talk more about my initial Army experience. In terms of work-life balance, I think this is something that the Army, I mean, America in general struggles with this. But I think in the Army, what we struggle with is if you see someone next to you that's struggling and working, like you're trained from day one to like, okay, go help them. It's such a team mindset from day one of training that like you succeed or fail as a team, and so you're going to go help your teammate. That is good as an instinct. The problem is that we equate sort of the warrior ethos of I will always place the mission first, I'll never quit, and the rest of that we equate that with we see I will never accept defeat. And we think, okay, I will never accept failure. And when we see I will never accept failure, it means I won't fail. And so we will, no matter how small the task, sort of overcommit to it. And that's a good instinct in certain situations. In a tactical situation, like, yeah, you should not have any, you should commit all of yourself, all of your energy, because the stakes are so high that it absolutely is rational to devote your entire mind, like your entire self, to that task in a tactical situation. But we keep that mindset as we bring it back to an organizational standpoint. And it leads to a lot of burnout and a lot of people that will, because they're so used to, I won't fail, I won't let the team down. The team needs me to get this thing ready by tomorrow for the briefing, but the slides don't talk to the other database that I need to password to, whatever. So I'll do it manually, and it's going to take 6 hours, and I'll be here till 10 p.m. And it's coming from a place like culturally that we need to be able to turn it on, and we need to have that mindset, but we don't need it all the time. And I was talking to Ray Polk. He was General Van Antwerp's aide at the time, because I had just become an XO, and I was noticing when I was a platoon leader, the weekend text messages were minimal or absent unless we had a soldier issue. But organizationally, it was going to get handled during business hours. And then when I was an XO, it started to bleed into like Sunday night and a little bit after work on Friday. And then later as a staff captain, I was noticing like, oh, it's starting to creep into Sunday afternoon, not just Sunday night.
Yeah.
And talking to Ray about this, said, you're the aide, the deputy commanding general for operations. Is it constant? And he goes, oh yeah, there's not a minute that you don't have something buzzing. And this is peacetime. There were no lives at stake. And if you don't have that margin, if you don't have somewhere to go to when like the crisis actually hits, like it means you're operating in crisis mode all the time. And
well, here's what I can share with you guys and with everybody is that there's only so many minutes in the day. We're going to fill those minutes. We were filling it when we were deploying with get your duffel bags into the container, pack your equipment for the deployment. And so it was easier to justify spending those minutes because they were going towards something that you thought was meaningful. We were still getting text messages 20 hours a day, every day, Saturday and Sunday. Nothing changed. We're still getting text messages every day, all those times. It's just about less significant things or things that you might think are less significant. We're still going to fill the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that disconnect between the level of urgency that people are perceiving of like, wow, this must be, people are saying this is no fail, mission critical. But like 90% of the things that as a staff officer I got told were no fail, like we could fail them and like no one would actually get hurt. No one was going to go without food. Like no one was
in a lot of cases, no one would have even known. Yeah, like nobody would know except you, the person that was putting it on the checklist. You're the only person that would have known that we would have. You're right. It can't be, everything can't be no fail. You can't treat getting the Excel spreadsheet filled out to the same level as how fast do we get this gunshot wound from the point of injury to the evacuation point. Those two things cannot be treated the same. And you can't say things like, well, because you didn't show up to formation with with the right equipment, at the right time, therefore you're not going to be able to get the casualty that when you do things like that all the time and you associate those two things as equal, that's where burnout comes. Because people are not idiots. They're not idiots when you say things like this is no fail and you're like, what are we doing right now? We have to have the PowerPoint slide turned in by 1400. They're not idiots. And they're not going to believe that that's mission critical, and they're not going to believe that that is no fail. There's not the same two things. And if you talk to them like it is, you're talking to them like they're an idiot.
Yeah, and one of two things will happen. Either your credibility with them is shot, and they won't believe you anymore, or maybe worse, they will believe you, and you can only operate in that mode for so long before, like, adrenally you collapse, and you get less of that. You get more people just not believing it. But there's a smaller subset of people that they just burn out in like 2 to 3 years as junior officers. And I remember thinking as a lieutenant, like, I can go very hard for short bursts of time, but the amount of time and energy and emergency mode operations I was doing just as an XO to keep the ship afloat, I remember thinking like, I can't possibly do this level of activity for 20 years. And the Army can't survive on just the energy of young officers for their first 2 or 3 years to handle these small problems so the organization survives.
And small problems, because what large scale problem are they solving? Is this solving contested logistics inside of the Pacific? Is this helping us with partnerships is this help building, partnerships and relationships that we have with our folks inside the Pacific? If the answer is no, like we need to start dialing it back a little bit and say, maybe it's definitely not mission critical. And I'm not saying, who was it the other day that said, It was George Sterling. He said, work-life balance is not an excuse to not do your job, right? It doesn't mean you don't have to train your people. It doesn't mean you don't have to do the things that are mission critical, because when you have time. What it takes is leaders to decide what is mission critical and what's not. Get rid of it. And it's not so we can send people home at 1600. It's so that we can focus on the mission critical things and spend more time on the important things and less time on things that are not important. And then we'll hopefully get to the point where we talk about how there's other systems out there that can be doing the non-important things for us. So we went into a lot of initial experiences about what the Army is, about what you kind of saw in your first 2 units, right? What stood out to you in those first couple of years when you said, okay, this is the way it is. I'm seeing what's going on out here. But you're like, what could it be? Without getting into too much of the detail right off the bat, but where could we be? Again, spoiler alert, what's the moonshot? Where could we be with the experience that you two guys have?
So I think when I think of the ideal Army, the ideal force, most of the big building blocks are the same. Like, it is an organization that's composed of experts that are subordinate to a civilian authority, and that we take the direction from our civilian leaders, and that we are the very best in the world at doing that. And as an organization, we are the perfect tool for the job. And I think what that looks like at a high level, we're still looking for that. Everyone agrees that's a good idea. At a much lower level, I think my ideal Army is one where it lives up to the same expectations or the same idea I had when I was a kid, when I was 16 or 17. This is a place where we make people, prioritize our people and training them. I think that where we've stopped doing that is that because there's so much bloat layered on, we're not able to spend the time on our people, or it's the exception, not the rule. And when you think fundamentally about what a maneuver unit does, they train people to be soldiers. And that should be most of the time. But if you look at the actual hours we spend training versus the hours we spend just managing the organization, it's grossly lopsided. And I think my ideal Army is one in which your officers and your leaders are doing the things only people can do, which is when things are truly subjective, they make those decisions. They steer the ship strategically. They weigh multiple opportunities, and they use a rational decision-making process to say, this is strategically where we need to go. This is how we line up our plan to pursue it. And their thinking is much more based around decision-making, not how do I take one thing, a bunch of known information, and put it into a different format. The information should be there. We just need to make a decision on it. And that's at the very officer high level. On the NCO level, one of the things that sort of started to, I won't say break my heart, but it was really hard to watch. When I was 21 and was in RTAC, I remember seeing the NCOs there. I was like, oh my God, these are strong, competent people. I need to be better than I am today if I'm going to lead them effectively. There was a sergeant who was teaching at RTAC that was awesome. But the sergeants and staff sergeants there, they were the real deal. And I thought that every Army NCO would be like that. And by the time I was leaving Schofield Barracks, we had sergeants that had just pinned on staff sergeant. We had some specialists who'd been promoted to sergeant. And they didn't know their basics. There were fundamentals in their tactical education that they didn't know. And it wasn't their fault. We got these people, we got them as privates in 214. And 3 years later, I'm watching him lead his team through a sticks lane, and it's all wrong. They're walking down the middle of the road. Everyone's next to each other. No one is looking to the left or the right. They're all looking directly into the helmet of the person in front of them. It's this is not that team leader's fault. He should know better, but how could he? We didn't teach him.
Yeah.
And why didn't we? And it's well, he's a sergeant. He's looking for his platoon sergeant to come down and teach him. But his platoon sergeant sitting next to me in an office trying to get the Excel sheet with everyone's blood type and everyone's last name, and maybe it's misspelled, but we need to get this packet together for this thing. His platoon sergeant's occupied. He has no time. And his first sergeant's that but worse. He's doing it for the whole organization. I think that after seeing it for 3 years, your first reaction to seeing that, like that lack of training and that lack of ability is, well, we haven't trained him. How can we train him? We should schedule some training. And then you realize like, okay, well, I tried and I couldn't, or I tried and I only got a little bit.
Yeah.
The best training we ever got was during COVID because there were no rules. All of the ranges were open. We had all of the ammunition because it wasn't going to get spent otherwise. So like my platoon could train, of all the platoons at Schofield Barracks, I'm pretty confident that we spent the most time in the training area from like January of 2020 through November when we went to JRTC.
Yeah, that was good times. That was an example of what could be, and how it could be, because all the extra stuff had gone away because it was unnecessary. We didn't need to do it. It was PT, and it was go to the training area, and it was do those things.
The initial reaction you have is when you see a staff sergeant who doesn't know how to do small unit tactics, is we should have trained you better. Like this, at the time I was a captain, I'd just been on captain, but I'd been a platoon leader, so I'd been training teams. I'm like, no, this is my fault. This is our fault. This is the lieutenants who are responsible for this. And there's different ways that you approach that based on your individual strengths. Are you the guy that knows how to set up the training and then you can let your platoon sergeant take like the sergeants and develop them? There's different ways to approach that. I felt like we were failing as an officer corps to allow our NCOs to be soldiers, and you apply all your energy to changing that. And most of the trainings that I planned that got off the ground required some sort of hoop I had to jump through bureaucratically, or like several, and almost all of them had such a high overhead. They generally got planned while I was on staff duty because there was nothing else going on, and I'd sit down at 8 p.m. after my checks, and I would just work until the sun came up on making sure everything was ready. And I had every piece of paper I would need to do that piece of training and then start marketing it. But as an officer, like we were failing to develop those people, but it wasn't for lack of trying. And so the more time you spend in the system, like each time you run up against a barrier, you want to go to the range, but you can't because all of the ranges north of this road are closed 1 week out of every 4, which was a policy at Schofield Barracks when I was gone. All of the ranges north of Coley would be closed 25% of the time for maintenance. And your rational mind, like we're losing 25% of our time for targetry. Like if we did it on the weekend, like instead of losing 5 working days, like they would have 8, and we would get all of our range time in the week back when we need it. There's little minor policy solutions. Mm-hmm. But like Captain Ponce-Pore, Lieutenant Ponce-Pore isn't going to change that. But you also have this thing where you apply your energy and you realize, like, I'm working for Captain Boggiano. Like he's possibly the smartest man in any room he walks into in the Army. And he's just made out of ability and commitment. Even with his support, like there were several trainings that, we had a pretty large thing planned and it got scoped down to something much smaller. Mm-hmm. And if there's new lieutenants listening, plan 6 days of training so you can get 2. And ask for 30,000 rounds so you can get 10,000. But then once you have your 10,000 rounds in your 2 days, like that's the main event, full commitment to that. I guess what I'm trying to say is at the end of my time as a lieutenant, I'd realized what made the happiest I ever saw my soldiers was at the end of JRTC on the truck back out of the box. 1, everyone's happy because you're leaving the box, but 2, like they're happy because they feel like they'd done something hard and they had done it well, and that they had come out on the backside of that experience like being better. They were better trained, they were more knowledgeable, they were more experienced, and I wanted to like recreate that feeling. There's so much managerial bureaucratic overhead that consumes our NCO corps almost in its entirety. How can we expect our senior NCOs actually do the teaching and the coaching and the mentoring that's so necessary? I felt initially as a failure of the officer corps to make that time. As I was leaving, I realized like no matter how hard you are trying and no matter how many hours you spend, rate at which you can accomplish basic tasks in the Army is so slow because of the bureaucratic bloat and the technical debt that we've accumulated, that without changing those systems first, like we can't get there. But like I couldn't ask my platoon sergeant to be a primary instructor because he had a laundry list of things that his first sergeant asked him to do. And it's not coming from the first sergeant. It's coming from like each echelon above us. And
everything grows exponentially at every level. Every time you go from the company level, it's like 4, right? So then you go to the battalion level. It doesn't go from 4 to 8. It goes from 4 to 16. And then as soon as the brigade gets involved, 16 goes to 32. It's like, oh shoot. Now it's we're going to JRTC. We're in the hundreds of things that need pieces of paper that need to get done in order. We won't even get into what it takes to get a Humvee from Hawaii to
Oh, I deployed Humvees to Indonesia and back, and it's insane. I guess what I want to be clear on two things. One, you always are angry at the echelon above you because they're giving you all this stuff to do. And then you become the echelon above you and you realize, like, wait a minute, there's no malice in the Army. But there is a lot of systemic issues that we could address.
Yeah.
The second thing is that every echelon you go up, the staff just balloons to handle the workload.
Oh my God.
And
tell me about
it. I have a theory. And I have no evidence for this, but I have a theory that
these are my favorite ones. This is my favorite. Zero source rumit.
Yeah, zero source, just total suspicion. Staffs create more work than they can complete. Just bigger your staff, the more work it creates. And
so I am they, and I'm gonna try to apply these things to the whole Pacific as we go forward. And so when you share these things with me, I might cut them out of the podcast, but you're still sharing it with Matt, and I plan on making some changes and doing some of these things with the Army, because I am the Army. When people say they, when you say the Army screwed me, the Army JPMRC screwed us. No, Matt did. I'm in charge of it. You can blame it on me. I'm the one that's going to be in charge.
And I will say, out of the things that the Army does right, that is one of them, is absolute accountability of leaders. Now that I'm in academia, there's a lot more diffusion of responsibility. And anytime when there's not a single name that says, this is mine, the product inevitably suffers. I love that about the Army. And there's a system. The Army will say, well, put this together. We have an operations officer. We have an operations staff. Let's get this all in one spot. And every week we'll send out the orders. And then I was that guy. I was that guy who was supposed to get everything into onto one sheet of music. And that took me and a lieutenant and the ops sergeant major almost a full 2 days every week just to collect everything that was coming down, because it's coming down in the wrong format. I have a lot of software ideas on how we could fix this that we won't get into.
People think technology has changed the way we do things. It hasn't changed that much. The fact that Lieutenant Ponce-Pore was using an Excel tracker to put and inputting numbers in manually, so was Lieutenant Leclerc. I was doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, and
I think the vast majority of that, it shouldn't be manual. It should be automatic, and it shouldn't be tracked on individuals' computers in Excel spreadsheets, sometimes pushed to teams to be lost to reality forever.
Yeah. The first thing is that we are absolutely buried in reporting and information, and every Army headquarters, wherever you are at all levels, at least once a week, there's a meeting where someone sits at the front of a table and faces a projector, and then there's seats on either side of the table for all of the minions to contribute their little part of that meeting. And it might be only a 30-second whatever from that person. And the reason that we do that is because most of those meetings are just the commander trying to figure out what's going on. What information do you need to be effective? And so providing them that information is critical. And that's how smart people make decisions. Providing it's really hard, but that's where all these trackers are coming from. The second thing is that, and this is really the reconnaissance brain coming out. People love to be told things, or here's some data, here's that. And it happens in the Army, but it's also true in academia. Everyone's fascinated by how can we get more data? What does the data say? Data is useful if it can drive decision making. And this is the same reconnaissance brain of, we would get our reconnaissance guidance as the Cav Squadron, and we'd look at it, and this is a huge problem with how people think of reconnaissance, is they would make the plan, where the battalions are going, which companies are hitting what objectives, and then they would give the Cav Squadron the order. And it's okay, well, why bother? If you've already made the plan, there's no reason to send scouts out to help you make decisions, because that's fundamentally what cavalry squadrons do. Is you don't know what the right decision is. There's only one way to find out certain pieces of information, and they're high risk. That's what the cavalry squadron's for, is go out there, risk your life, get into contact, figure out the critical piece of information we need to make a decision, and then we can put the battalion in the right place. And we flip that too many times where we already know where the battalion's going. We're just kind of curious what the objective looks like. So let's do combat trivia. The scouts will go out, and it causes problems both that way of like, okay, why am I out here if the battalion's hitting it anyway? Like, sure, I can try to figure out like how many machine guns are on the objective, but if there's 3 or 4, like that's a problem the company commander is going to figure out, and he's going to solve that. Like he's capable of doing that.
Totally.
We're actually just burning the objective if we have a bunch of scouts running around in the woods. And now also the battalion can't own the battle space because they have scouts in front of them. Now we're trying to pass units through each other's lines, generally at night. Like it just induces all of this pain, and we're not doing anything with it. And a lot of this is driven, in my opinion, because I didn't do reconnaissance and combat. I did it in CTCs. It's driven by a 10-day CTC, where if we could, for JRTC, if we could have sent just 214 in for 5 days and then followed up with the battalions, that window would have let us go in, figure out the things that we were asked to, like engage with the enemy, probe, like do all of the things that we're taught how to do and that a maneuver commander can manage, like the maneuver commander of the Cav squadron. He can manage those things. And then the information we generate will drive decision making, and then the plan gets built. We don't do that because it's a 10-day CTC. We know it's a 3-day battle period, and the Cav squadron has 8 to 12 hours on a good day to do all of the reconnaissance. Like, well, I'm a dismounted infantry platoon. In 12 hours in JRTC at night, like, well, it'll be daytime by the time we get there, but if we infill at 10, I've got 8 hours to get into my position. I just can't go that far. And that it makes the Cav squadron much less useful. And it's the wrong thinking of we have this asset, we should use it. Amen. Not how do we generate data? How do we get information? What decision are we making? And I feel like a lot of problems in the Army are driven by we have some information, we don't know if it's good. We have a decision. Is the information that we have, does it correlate at all with the decision we're trying to make? And frequently it doesn't. And if it does, we don't have assurance that information is really good. Or these slides are out of date, whatever. And it's just something we can fix. Yeah. And if we could automate it, not only would it allow decisions to be better and allow leaders to make more like engage with real executive function of between alternatives, which one is the optimal choice or the best choice. That's what commanders are built for. And it would also take all of the overhead off of if we only entered the data once and everything else was generally point and click. That means your platoon sergeant has 30 minutes of admin in the morning and 30 minutes of admin at night. And after that, he's down there with soldiers. And it would be an awesome Army. It'd be so fun.
What special opportunities do you see in the next couple of years that you're going to be working on that you think are the future of our Army?
Again, I was in the first cohort to go through the AI Scholars Program and to go to CMU. They specifically went after lieutenant promotables and young captains. This has caused a lot of consternation now on the backside because the vast majority of us are not triple C complete, much less KD complete. So at this point, I've been a captain for almost 2 years, and I have yet to go to captain's career course. It's unlikely that I will go anytime in the near future. Even if I do eventually get to captain's career course, it's very unlikely that I would be able to get KD time. Very unlikely in the armor world. It's put a lot of people in a tight spot. And I think, as a total aside, like there's people looking at this now, like why would we have done this? And like now we have to like specially manage all of these people. They overlook the fact that in most of the cohorts, and I know specifically in mine, the vast majority of the people who are now still in the Army and working at AI, working to try to modernize the Army in a meaningful way, most of them would not be in the Army anymore. It's kind of this weird, it's not fully understood, I feel like, a lot of times by senior leaders because they look at us and they look at us as like deficient because we haven't gone to triple C, we haven't done our KD time. But the reality is we wouldn't be deficient because a lot of us wouldn't be in the Army anymore. I will fully admit that I was probably going to be one of those people. I was already starting to count down the days when I was at PL and XO of like when I could start getting out of the Army and like plotting on how I could most efficiently make sure that at my 5-year mark I could be done and then go back to grad school and go move on with my life. I was very ready to cut ties with the Army and get out, and I'm still in. Being in the position that I am in now kind of have rekindled a little bit of the passion that I had when I first came into the Army out of West Point. I think it's the biggest thing for me is that I feel like I can have actual systemic change on the organization. And that was something that I didn't feel was possible when I was in the force. And that was something that was really frustrating to me. Like, I looked out into the world from my little keyhole and saw that the only way I can start maybe having impact is being in the Army for 20 plus years. And I wasn't willing to make that commitment. I wasn't, based on my experiences that I had, I was very against trying to continue to like fight this fight and grind myself down for 20 to 25 years just to like maybe have the Army say yes and get me to a position where I could make organizational change. But I think that we're in a very unique position at AITC, and a very unique position with the degrees that we have and the technical backgrounds that a lot of the people here at AITC possess. In that we can have outsized positive change on the Army and can help it actually modernize and like meet some of the long-term goals of modernization, moving the whole Army forward into the future, and hopefully trying to alleviate some of the problems that Remi's already talked about. And I'm really motivated to like keep making to like continue on and like keep working and pushing to like make these changes. And it's unfortunate that now I am potentially, and Remi will face the same thing, like we're potentially coming up with a point where the Army will just say no to us and basically say, well, you haven't done what your required timeline says, so we won't promote you, and we're going to just let you ride out your time as captain, or maybe even like push you out early before your ADSO is complete, especially in Remi's case. We're trying to contend with that, and we're trying to figure it out. There's obviously options. V-tipping is a potential option to one of the functional areas that is more technical. Then maybe we can continue to have this kind of impact. But we also come across a lot of resistance from the traditional organization hierarchy, because the collective group at AITC is mostly captains. People either don't realize we exist. We've definitely gotten a lot of feedback that falls along the lines of, we can't do what we're doing because there's no way that there's these kind of technically capable people in the Army. Like, this talent doesn't exist in the Army, so like obviously we have to go farm it out, when there's a lot of that technical talent sitting right here in Pittsburgh, and I imagine much more across the Army that just are either going to get out in the near future, or they maybe they'll find an opportunity like this AITC, or maybe more opportunities will open up that will start pulling people early, and the Army can kind of break its traditional view of like what your timeline and progression are from like lieutenant through captain and major.
Yeah. I think that a lot of our experiences were radically different in terms of leadership. I think that you felt like your leadership failed as leaders and as people. I had sort of the inverse experience. I really looked up to the leaders I had, but I was also uniquely blessed by, like, my brigade commander was Colonel Mayo, and he was amazing. And the things that he did, the example he set, even in just the way his like personal comforts, or really the lack thereof when we were deployed in Indonesia, was inverse to your situation, where no one lived harder than Colonel Mayo and his sergeant major, because if there was a comfort offered to him, he immediately made sure it went to a soldier. That was not Abby's experience at all. And I think that coming to AITC, Abby was looking for a way that she could contribute that wouldn't require her to just be treated that way and see her soldiers treated that way. And for me, it was, I wanted to come to AITC because I'd seen great leaders and great people. They still weren't effective. And when you look at organizations, like, you can kind of look at them in two ways. Will this organization succeed if everyone's making the wrong decisions? Is it robust enough structurally that it will continue to succeed? And then you can look at it through the opposite lens of, if everyone's doing the exact right thing every time, is the organization so archaic that it can't be successful. And
yeah, that's two totally different. You're so right that that's two totally different inverse relationships, right? Between those. And what I want to say about, to Abby's point about, being out there and with the program that you guys are in, and your branch reps aren't sure how to handle you, and you're not sure how to get branch qualified, and why would we get branch qualified, and why would we do all the same things that that everybody else is doing, and they have to figure it out. I would say, as an old dude, I'd say welcome to the frontier. Like, if everything is easy, you're not on the frontier, you're not out there. Space travel is crazy. When we're out here experimenting and doing things that people haven't done before, there's no rules. Thank God there's no policies, because we don't know what to do. And they're just looking at people like us, people like you, to say, show us what we should do. And then you run into a lot of roadblocks, which is like, hey, here's what I think we should do. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. You just asked me to show you what we're going to do. And I told you what I think we should do. And they're like, well, you don't know. It's just not going to work that way. Again, welcome to the frontier, because here we are, talent management, BCAP, CCAP, all these things that I see. And every time I make a recommendation to somebody or I say something, they're like, it can't work that way. Why can't it work that way? Like, why can't it be that way? Why can't we have a modification? Why can't we just modify things for certain people, for certain things? It doesn't have to be exactly the same. The problem is it's because of scale. Because the Army is so big and our systems are so big that we have a hard time managing the onesie twosies, this person, that person, and give them a little stamp. And we're also a lot, jaded on like, well, if we did that, someone would take advantage of the system. Someone would cheat. Someone would lie. Someone would do something. And people like us go, why would somebody lie about that? Like, why would somebody cheat the system in order to not get KD? I want to do KD. I want to be some of these positions. I want to do the things, but it's hard. You can't do everything. You can't go to grad school. You can't get a PhD. You also can't get your graduate degrees and then do a utilization tour and be a company commander. Like, some of those things have to give. Or you just let me be a captain for 12 years. Well, I don't know if sure I want to be a captain for 12 years. I would like to get paid a little bit more. I would like to get promoted. I would like to be able to get into a position where I can maybe influence people a little bit more. But we're on the frontier. Mm-hmm. You're looking at a person that's been told more than 3 times, like, if you do what you're doing, it's career suicide. Like, you're not going to get promoted. I'm still here, and like, I'm still around. I'm still doing it. And they're like, well, you can't do it that way. Like, okay, well, maybe you were able to do it, but nobody else is going to be able to do it. And you just got to keep going. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. And like, hey, it's time to turn in your paperwork for whatever. And I'm not doing it. I'm not turning in paperwork for that. Anyway, I digress again. That was a good segue. The great segue of bridging the gap between, you guys also just kind of hit why you stayed. What kind of kept people like you guys around was those special opportunities. And it wasn't that you were searching for a special opportunity. It's that you were searching for some inspiration. You were searching for a way to make a difference. You were searching for a way to influence big decisions that are happening out there. You talked a little bit about those special opportunities and what are we seeing. Let's get into a little bit. What are some of the most exciting things that you guys are seeing out there? When we get there, you're like, this is going to change the game. So I can start to get an idea about what to expect in the future.
Yeah, I want to do that just really quick before we do. I at least want to be clear that when I was deciding, because my ADSO was over when I picked up this new one. I could have gotten out of the Army and had my obligation fulfilled. The reason I came to AI2C was first because Abby was here. And if this had been an opportunity in San Francisco or New York, and it hadn't been where she was, then I wouldn't have taken it. So like we're kind of the lucky ones, and that we were doing the same thing. We both could do the same thing, and so we could be together. But that was the most important thing in terms of life priorities. I'd said I'd put off our marriage for the Army for a while, and that needed to change. And then on top of that, I could also fundamentally change the things that had consistently bothered me. And you want to do the thing that you are uniquely capable of, that only you can do, or that only a small amount of people can do. Like find the smallest subset of the population that you fall into that can do a certain thing and do that. Because like I could go be a tank company commander, but there's a lot of people who are good commanders. Those people might not be able to do what we're doing now. And so I can do more for the Army doing this. And I think that we both feel that way.
Yeah, I love
and
that.
we'll have different strengths while we do it.
At heart, I'm truly just a staffer. I'm not nearly. I'm very bad at being like a leader in like real situations. It's like just not my strong suit. I'm a big planner who just wants to like sit and make plans and in the back.
And there's like different types of leadership: tactical and operational and strategic. Feel different. And
yeah, I'm a mediocre at best tactical leader, I guess I should say. And like I recognize that about myself, but you know, I know that I can make a much bigger contribution to the Army and like a much more probably generally positive one. Not that I would like go out of my way to be a bad leader, but like I can have a much more positive influence doing this kind of work than I could if I was going to go be a company commander.
Yeah, that's key right there. Is the part about knowing what I feel like I'm good at. This is where I feel like my strengths are, and we don't need everybody to be good at the same things. We don't need everybody to be doing the same stuff. Everybody doesn't need to check exactly the same boxes as we go forward.
I think that you get more self-awareness as you get older. We were brought here because we're analytical. The part of your brain that's analytical can work with really abstract stuff is generally not the part of your brain that's good at handling concrete tactical situations. One of the most important things in like a tactical situation is picking a good option immediately so you can just execute that simple plan violently. And that is really not good thinking when you're trying to make like organizational decisions or when you're doing something that's really that just takes a lot of analysis and thinking. You need to be able to change your mind and be really open-minded and constantly be second guessing yourself when you're doing that sort of abstract analytical stuff. And you absolutely can't be that way in a tactical situation. Knowing that those are kind of two different brains.
Wow.
You can grow in both areas, but and one doesn't come at the cost of the other, but they do get developed separately. Right now, we're both very much leaning into the analytical side, and that's good, and we need that in the Army, but it doesn't make us better tactical leaders. And if we need tactical leaders at the company level, then hopefully the Army finds a way to put people that are patriotic and committed and understand the Army into a place where they can make a difference. So anyway.
No, that was really good. That wasn't like an anyway. That was really good description of how we can take some of these systems and make a difference in the future. And not everybody has to be doing exactly the same thing. You're 100% right. Because there's other people that can't do any of the things that you're talking about, but they can make a good decision based on, do I go left? Do I go right? I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm wet. This is what I'm good at. I can't do the other things. And we shouldn't ask that person to go off and work on a staff and be a detailed planner. And as soon as we say that plan was terrible, we can never put you in charge of anything. Well, that's not what, those are two different things. I love how you described that, Remi.
Yeah. And I think like it's hard because you want your organizational leaders, your brigade commanders, you want them to have tactical background. It's unthinkable to have a brigade commander who was never a platoon leader, but the things that made you a good platoon leader, not all of those things translate to the brigade level. And I think the Army knows that, and we've done our best to try and put a process together that will take any platoon leader in the Army and make it so that eventually they could be a brigade commander. But not every lieutenant in the Army should go on to brigade command. And so we shouldn't treat every lieutenant like they're a future commander. We should let them be a lieutenant, and then from there find a path that's optimal for them and for the Army.
Yeah. What percentage of people that come into the Army are going to end up being a battalion commander? Why are we applying a metric or a scale or a roadmap for 100% of our folks that applies to 2% of the people? Likewise, it would be just as ridiculous to say everybody can do whatever they want. You can't just have everybody creating their own thing.
Exactly. But like, I think there also has to be a little bit more nuance in how we look at the different progressions that exist and like how we manage the different people to try to put them into the positions where they're going to be the most successful and likely be the most satisfied with the work that they're doing. And like and having like a desire to continue to do that kind of work and stay in the Army and continue to have an impact because they feel like they are having an impact.
Yeah. Things that you think you feel like you're having an impact, things that you enjoy doing, you usually do a better job doing it. And things that I'm usually pretty good at, I enjoy doing. I don't hate doing things that I'm good at. Rarely are we really good at things that we hate doing. And so when you start to figure out what some of those things are, we should kind of keep people going in those directions and be a little bit more flexible.
I was thinking about this, like the people who are really good in the tactical world, that they actually enjoy that. No one really loves being cold and hungry and tired, but certain people, they enjoy the physicality of it and the challenge. I think it's pretty rare that people leave the Army and when you ask them, like, why'd you get out? They're like, oh, JRTC was really unpleasant. Like that, I'm sure it happens, but it's a minority of the talented people. Most people who are leaving the Army ask them, like, you getting out because you're tired of going to training exercises? Like, well, no. I'm getting out because the day-to-day garrison is grinding me down. I would actually like to do more training because that's the part that's meaningful for them that they enjoy. And I feel like we lose good leaders just because the day-to-day in the Army is hard to deal with over time.
Yeah. When I was growing up in the Army in the early 90s, I'm showing my age, but in the 90s, there was a term that we used for people that were really good in tactical in the field. And we would say, like, they're great in the field, but they're terrible in garrison. And a lot of times it was that person was really good at live fires, and that person was really good at hitting targets, really good with their road marching, physically fit, right? But they were terrible at the administration. They were terrible at doing NCOERs or OERs. They were really bad at doing the range requests, and stuff like that. So they were really bad at admin, or they would go back and drink too much, party too much, get in trouble. So we'd be like, yeah, they're great when we keep them in the field, but as soon as we get them out of the field, they're not the kind of people that we can sustain. But we would say, like, they're a break glass in case of war kind of person. Now it's very similar. It's just replace some of those things with, I would be really good at these things, at fighting and win our nation's wars. But if you want me to do all these other things, I'm not the right person. And they know that. And so some of them are choosing to not be in the Army anymore, or they're choosing to do other things because they like, call me if there's a war. Call me when the time comes where you need that. But right now, what you don't need is me. And we're struggling with that.
And I had several soldiers that were like that who were actively working to get out or got out for basically that reason. I mean, they come in every day and they'd either have like admin tasks that they were not good at, or they'd have nothing to do and they'd sit around on their phones all day. They want a purpose and they want like value in their day-to-day lives, and we just were consistently not delivering that. And it was just purely like they came in expecting a certain thing, and what they got was a lot of downtime and a lot of bureaucratic responsibilities that they didn't want to, or were sometimes incapable of like dealing with that.
But you think of, like, if there's any organization in the world where you can be physically fit, motivated, tolerate discomfort, and demonstrate discipline, like, the Army should be the place that you want to be. Like, we should be the place where people like that are like, yeah, school's not my thing, but I'm made of grit. I'm ready to contribute. The Army should be a place where they can do that. I had a lot of soldiers that I felt like they had the ability, but I could not turn the wheel fast enough to supply training at the level at which they could consume it. And I could not challenge them on a regular enough basis that they felt like they were growing. And I could look at them and they're foggy-eyed and they're disappointed because they know that they have more to give. Sir, give me something to do. Like, give me a mission.
Yeah.
They're like, I will in 2 weeks when the range request is approved and the ammo's happened and I've coordinated with the support troop to bring it over and I've got all the names on the flight manifest, and it's going to happen. I promise it'll be great. I hope that with our work at AITC, we can close that loop a little bit.
How do we close the loop a little bit?
So we're going to get a little more technical now. Yeah, Abby's excited.
Yeah.
So
me too.
This is cool. So the Army, I think, has recognized we need to change a lot, fundamentally change a lot of our systems. I think that it's becoming apparent to people that the way that we do daily business in the Army more or less amounts to, say, manual entry of almost every data point, and the data is generally disregarded in favor of expert opinion. We put a really high priority on experience and, the hierarchy of we'll present this data, but it all comes down to this one person's decision. That's good, but the data itself was probably not great, and that person might not have the data literacy to understand it. We're very focused on experience and deferring to seniority. I don't think it makes for the best organizational outcomes. We need to have leaders who are accountable and who take responsibility. And they own that thing, they own that organization, but we need to equip them better to make those decisions. And that starts with providing them with the necessary information to make a decision. What that looks like in a garrison sense is all organizational data. So if you're a maneuver commander, you need to know where all of your companies are in their basic HR metric. How many bodies do you have? Are your soldiers healthy? Are they deployable? What are the legal cases? Like all of the HR stuff that it comes with every organization that has people. And then you have a second side of it that's the tactical side. Are we proficient on an individual level? Are we proficient on a team level, and so on up the chain of larger and larger units? Right now, this information is held across the Army in, I want to say the last count was something like 280 different systems. And we think of a system, you can think of MedPros, which isn't just one system, it's several. And then aviation has its own multiple systems for tracking helicopter maintenance. And one of our friends is addressing that now. DTMS, I think, is going away in favor of something else, but that was the tactical training information system, which didn't really talk to CATs, but it was sort of all in one spot in ATM. And these are all the acronyms, but all of your information is housed in a different place.
And like, this is fundamentally to get to the point where you can have AI. There's multiple steps that happen before that. And the very first one is being data literate or just data ready. And this kind of describes a situation where you're actually starting to recognize that you have data, you're starting to collect it in some way, you're starting to try to store it and think about using that data in a meaningful way. And it's not perfect. There's like steps that'll get you to the point where your data is able to the point where you can use it. And that's kind of the next step. But you can think of this as a pyramid. If you don't have the base of the pyramid built, you can't work your way up to the top. In this analogy, the very top is AI. And there's a lot of really cool things you can do with computers, with AI, with machine learning. The lines between machine learning and AI are pretty fuzzy depending on who you talk to and what their understanding is. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of really cool things that we could do just in an Army context with those tools. But fundamentally, the Army is not in a place where it's ready to start using those tools. And
Amen.
A lot of the work that at least I do on a day-to-day basis at AI2C has absolutely nothing to do with artificial intelligence and machine learning. It would hopefully enable it in the future, but we're trying to change how these systems work. And back to like what Remi was talking about, one of the biggest problems is that the Army has built silos. And there's various reasons for this. Part of it is
over time it happens.
Over time it just kind of happens. There's also some of the bureaucratic structure that we have in place in terms of how we acquire technology it ends up making things very siloed because the requirements get written to do a very specific thing. And previously, there just haven't been a lot of requirements to start trying to make these different stacks of technology communicate with each other.
Yes.
And if you don't plan that up front, and those underlying technical stacks are different, and you don't build in certain interfaces to allow communications to flow back and forth between these different systems, it's almost impossible to retroactively go in and make that happen in an efficient way. There's also a lot of times this comes up too, is the problem that like sometimes the systems are owned by the Army, but the underlying technical stack, the infrastructure, the code is proprietary. It was bought by the Army from someone else. And so then the Army can't go in and like restructure that, or it's so far in the legacy that no one knows how to work with it anymore. And so we have these continuing silos, and it's not just in the technical stack too. Remi kind of also hit on this, like it's also the data, and we have structured our systems in such a way where different people own different sets of data, and the only way you can start sharing that data is if the data owners allow you to share that data. And then of course there's a whole bureaucratic process that goes into like making sure you can have those kind of shared agreements. And if you can't readily share data across your organization and it gets siloed into specific places where only a few people know about it, you kind of hit a wall. Really quickly. You're just going to continue to have to be in this like manually transmitting or manually moving data from one place and pulling it from one spot to get it into another so that someone else can get it from somewhere else. And that's a really arduous process, and it's not easily automated. It takes a lot of man hours to work with.
Yeah.
And you start getting into the spiral that like we kind of see with all of our different systems not talking to each other and basically forcing people to have to go find the specific information that they want, which hopefully exists, but doesn't always exist.
Yeah. And to kind of simplify this, like to bring this back to like if my mom started to listen, you know, or my aunt started listening and she was like, hey, what are y'all talking about right now? You know, I think, and again, I start to dork out too because I'm interested in this kind of stuff because I was a computer science major as well. And it's like, you know, you bought a refrigerator that sits in the kitchen. Like it's already got the code. It's already got all the stuff. It knows when you push the glass against it to push ice or water. Like that's what it does. It's programmed. Like, and it's foolproof. And it will work 100%, almost 100% of the time. It makes ice and it produces crushed ice or, you know, whatever. But like, this is the equivalent of like me saying, I'm in charge of this house. I'm in charge. From now on, I want that refrigerator to say when Matt shows up, I want it to put an espresso to come out of that thing. And when Ryan shows up, I want it to be a smoothie. And when Christy shows up, I want Pog to come out of that thing. And they're like, you can't do that. Like, that's ridiculous. Like that, it's already programmed to do ice or water. That's what it does. If you want something different, go buy a new refrigerator. And that's what we end up having to do, right? You can't modify the code. I can't get into the refrigerator and modify it without spending thousands of dollars. So I got to throw the refrigerator away and go buy a brand new refrigerator. No, what we don't have is that. We have an espresso machine in the back. We've got a Vitamix over here on the side to make our smoothies. You know, you've got a separate machine in your house to do all these things, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we're talking about right now is how do we take care of our people on the medical side? How do we take care of our people administratively? When Matt LeClaire wants to PCS from the Army War College to the 196th in this summer, all the systems that are going to have to come together to get that data. Do you know how much movement Matt LeClaire and Christy LeClaire have to do for that move in this summer?
I assume you're staying in the same spot. But...
You would assume right. Zero. The answer is nothing. I don't have to move anything. I don't have to get a new car. I'd have to do nothing except instead of getting in my car and driving to Honolulu, I'm going to get in my car and drive to Fort Shafter. I already know where I got to go. I know what I'm going to be responsible for. I know who I'm taking over for. Everything. When we simplify those processes and we say this is what we're trying to do inside of our house, inside of our Army, you know, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Is there something that's out there that thinks that we're going to be able to start making these things talk?
I think from what I've seen, we're slowly moving in the right direction. Do you want
to? I do. I have two thoughts on this. I think in a perfect world, the humans touch the data once. We put it in. We say, this is my social security number. This is my name. This is my blood type. And after that, you have your CAC or whatever we're using at that point. And when you need to do your SRP, you ding your CAC and all your information's there. You're not filling out the same social data sheet. And when you go to the medical clinic, you ding your CAC. You're not filling out the same, is it the DD2785 that has the same, like, this is still my name. This is still like my social. Nothing has changed, but it's the 8th time I filled this form out. Data entry happens once. But then when you're a first sergeant and you want to send someone to school, you log into your first sergeant thing and it knows because you got assigned to be a first sergeant. The machine, army.com that we're going to make, it knows. It says, you know, welcome, first sergeant. Here's the list of your soldiers. And you click on a soldier and you say schooling and you want to send that soldier to Ranger School.
Amen.
It's just a button. And you click on it and it either says, hey, you want to send him to Ranger School? we noticed that like these prerequisites were not met. Do you want to override? Because maybe something didn't happen, and you can send him. And then the automated message goes to the G8 and the funding moves over to RTB, or because it's all the same Army money, maybe we just get rid of that entirely. But that
No, we
now
have
we're
to
on
keep
the
the
frontier. Now we're talking.
it screens,
Yes.
it goes over the medical side, it pulls his latest physical so he doesn't have to go to the clinic in person and try to schedule his physical. But you can't do that yet because we only run the calendar for the next 4 weeks. The next 4 weeks are full, so come back in 2.5 weeks, but you're on leave, so you can't.
Yes.
This whole thing. It's just, he clicks the button, says send him to Ranger School. It scans it. It says, yep, here's we've already generated the DTS reservation. We've already generated all of the stuff that says, yep, he's going to be in Abrams Hall for a week. So he can adjust from Hawaii to wherever. Like it's there.
Yeah.
You can just
and it
click.
totally exists out there because, the first thing I learned in 1999, I started in computer science. And Dr. Mark Burge said to me, if you can imagine the technology, it already exists. Because you're not smarter than everybody else. Like somebody else has already thought about this. You just don't have your hands on it yet. It exists. And so like when I was growing up in 1999 and we were doing computer programming, like Google Glass already existed. It was just not perfected. Right? Siri already existed, which is like, if there was just some way where I could say whatever I wanted to say and someone would listen to what I was saying and try to implement it. We just haven't perfected it, right? We didn't have voice recognition and stuff like that in the 90s. Well, now every phone has it. It's still not perfect, but you can go to your phone and you don't even, if I was to say it right now, it would probably call my mom. But like, I would just say, call mom. Now, as long as mom's phone number is appropriate in my phone, it knows my voice, it picks it up. Like, so you can imagine the technology that exists. All the things you just said, Remi, exist. Yeah. There's algorithms that already have done this stuff. It's called Facebook. Like you can look at my Facebook, you can see who all my friends are. You can see when my birthday is. You can see when my mom. You can see like who's in my family, who am I connected to. I'm sure there's a way for them to see who are the 10 people that I communicate the most, spend the most amount of my time communicating with. It already does these things. And so it exists. The problem is that the people that have created these algorithms for Instagram and Facebook are not in the Army. Mm-hmm. Those people live in Silicon Valley. Those people are doing other things. But why haven't we as a military tied these things together? Like, why haven't we said, hey, I need Google. Like, thank God I'm friends with the guys at Google right now. And that's who I tie into. And I go, hey, create this system for us. So like, I need you to create a system called Bard that says, Bard, what's the status of Remi Ponce-Pore's Ranger School packet? And that's it. All I had to do is on my device, it said, what's the status of Remi's Ponce-Pore packet? And it just starts going, do, 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 do. His physical is done. His thing is that this hasn't been signed. Like, do, do, do. And it was like, hey, turn all the red boxes to green. You're like, well, sir, it would require you to get approval. I'm giving voice approval for that person to go, travel TDY, blah, 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 like that. If you can imagine the technology, just think it. It exists somewhere. We just don't have it in the Army. We just don't have it tied together. And so I'm so excited the fact that you guys are working on this stuff. And like, I can believe it. I can see it. It absolutely is going to happen. It's just going to happen after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and that's the thing. It's like, I think one of the big frustrations that, probably everyone that is around our age has, it's like, as soon as I leave the Army systems, like everything works super easy, exactly how I expect it to. And it's all right there. I can get to anything that I need. I don't have to like have sandpaper against my head, as you like to say, trying to like work with these arcade and outdated systems.
You can't get on an airplane these days unless you have a QR code of your boarding pass and you have a driver's license. Like those two things, you can go anywhere in the world with my phone and my ID card, and my daughter can go with me anywhere in the world. It's amazing.
Yeah. Right. And it's like, it's a huge frustration because then you come into the Army sphere and we can't do even the most basic stuff. I mean, a lot of times our systems look and sometimes are from the early 2000s and they feel like that they are or older. And yeah, I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
And so I absolutely want to do this. Like, let's update the Army technology. When we do it, let's make sure we have a system that allows for continuous updates so we don't try to solve the problem once and then we're like, yes, we did it. We'll never need to change the system again. It's perfect. It's like, no, it's going to have to change. Build it so it can be changed. Build it so it's not the only thing we can do.
I mean, and it's like, and this is a huge update to the acquisitions paradigm of just like, we're going to like get the thing and then we're going to have that thing for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years.
Like you jumped out of a C-130. I've jumped out of a C-130.
I've jumped out of a C-130.
I think started flying sometime in the 60s. And like, there's nothing super wrong with the airplane, but that's how we think about our hardware. Like all of the vehicles that I was on an M1A1 tank in Bullock. That tank was designed in the 70s and produced in the 80s. Like we think so long-term about these hardware solutions that like, the current system for putting things into the Army is so slow that like,
and it doesn't account for like the regular update.
Yeah.
Because realistically, a big software platform has to have pretty much constant maintenance to keep up with whatever new vulnerabilities come out, whatever new features need to be added. I mean, you are constantly turning over on the code, the underlying code, and I mean, even I think we're going to start running into problems too with like on the hardware side, just with like the infrastructure to support all of this. Like if we want to start moving computing and technology further and further towards the edge, like you have a whole train of hardware that has to go in place to support the compute and network that's needed to run those kinds of things. And I feel like we're not necessarily thinking about that. And when we are, we're still thinking of it in the context of every couple of months, NVIDIA is going to release newer and newer GPUs that are going to be better and better. And like CPUs are constantly getting better, and you're constantly improving storage and storage capacity without like really changing the size of the storage itself. The hardware for computers and computing and servers is going to also continually improve at a rate that far exceeds what our capacity is to get the updates to that. I mean, I think probably the first way that we can start to try to address this is changing how we write the requirements in such a way that we're not tying ourselves to a specific hardware or a specific item, but writing the requirements in a way that we're tying it to a capability
or a service.
Or a service that can be regularly updated and continuously updated.
Like I'm not asking you to provide me with an Android. I'm asking you to provide me with a service, which is an ability to communicate with my people. And if that means that every 12 months I get a new device, new phone that comes to me with new hardware on it, because now it can hold battery life is longer. I mean, just using the fact that we're communicating through my cell phone right now, my iPhone is the perfect example. It's like a good analogy for everything we're talking about, which is every 12 months you get a new iPhone, Maybe you could stretch it out to 24 months, 36 months if you're crazy. But like every 12 months, this thing, the battery life on it triples, storage on it quadruples, and then it's probably even exponentially greater than that because now we have the cloud.
And I think it's kind of two things. One is we're tied to our old hardware acquisitions and we don't recognize software as like, we have no way of thinking about acquiring either a service of let me communicate with my people, or I'm going to acquire this new platform and it's going to be constantly changing and updating. We're very much like we get the thing and then we have the thing and we maintain the thing. In terms of successes, what we have seen, there's a captain at AITC, Andre Michel, that I've known Andre and his wife now for 10 years, because we were in the same freshman company at West Point, which is wild. But he's built a system for aviation that basically marries two databases in aviation that were previously not talking to each other, and all of the data transfer between the two was manual. Andre's built something which efficiently automatically integrates those pipelines and presents it in a human readable form. It's called Griffin. Really impressive platform. It costs the Army $800 a year. If you measured that cost in man hours that he's saved, like he probably is saving something on the order of like, if there's 2,000 working man hours in a year across the 800 users that we're probably doing spending a fifth of their time on that. Like we're looking at something like 40,000 man hours.
It's a huge amount. And like, again, fundamentally, there's no AI or machine learning. Now they're trying to like work that in as well, but the value of Griffin is coming from automating the process of trying to transfer data back and forth and pull it from different places to put it all in one spot to like make it easy to see. Before, most of the time what they're doing is like manually going and pulling it, trying to like decipher, process the information manually, and then put it into a PowerPoint so it could be in a slide that then could be presented to a commander. All of the time that would have been spent on a weekly basis to do all of that work is now gone. It costs the Army basically Andre's degree and his salary. Like that is just technical talent that we have in-house currently working to solve the Army's problems.
It's a real success. It's really in the Army across, I forget how many brigades now.
I think of basically everyone they've rolled it out to, like no one's going to go back to the old system. Like everyone will be outraged if they take Griffin away.
Do we have it here on this island?
I would assume so.
Yeah, they've definitely...
Andre and Taylor were both stationed at Schofield, so they make the time to, if there's a TDY, they go.
Yeah, we can ask, but I'm almost certain they did the cab in 25th.
But yeah, awesome system. Griffin, Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally, it's a data engineering project, working at that first level of the hierarchy of just data literacy, your data ready, just trying to get us there. And like that's, just awesome. Saw a problem, solved it. And like one of the really cool things about AITC is that in general, the people that are deciding on the project, a lot of these projects are coming from captains at AITC who see a problem. They're like, you know what? I bet I could solve that. And it's not a top-down, like, let's do a survey of the whole Army that will then, rack and stack all of the different problems we have, and then we'll rank them, and then we'll write requirements for them and send the requirements to AITC, and we'll spend 3 years studying the problem at this stage. And it works at this scale. Just a few smart people working in a small team. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm going to change something. Let's make the incremental change today, and then let's build it so it can be scaled.
Yeah, I know you didn't do this on purpose, but you guys just like inspired something. You gave me an idea. What that is like, well, first, it's like I just wrote down future conversations. We're not going to cover everything we wanted to cover today. So imagine 6 months from now or 4 months from now, whatever it might be. I'm the commander of the 196. I'm out here. Here's what I'm experiencing. Here's what I'm seeing out here. The data things, all the things we talked about 6 months ago, blah, 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 like this. And we're going to have another conversation on this. So keep that in mind, what we're going to cover in future conversations, the three of us, right? And do this exact same thing again in the future. Updates on what we we talked about before. Where are we at right now? We're doing different things. We've made no progress in this. We've made a lot of progress in that. Griffin is now across the whole Army, blah, blah, whatever it might be. If that's the next thing, the last thing I want to just make some notes on for us. What have we not covered that you guys wrote on the notebooks that I see in front of you, that what it is, what it could be, thoughts on the Army, initial experiences you had, how that led into the special opportunities that you guys had right here. Then we kind of started talking about what it could be in the digital, the data, how could we bridge the gap?
I mean, I think I just want to reiterate, there's a lot of incredible talent at AI2C, and I think it's representative of, on both the NCO, warrant, and officer side, reflective of a lot of talent that exists in the Army. I think the Army is really struggling to keep right now. And I think providing these kind of opportunities is a way to not only retain them, but to make the Army a better place and to have that bigger impact. Again, I feel like I've heard over and over again from senior leaders, senior people in the acquisitions world, senior people on the civilian side, like DA civilians. There's just this belief that the Army can't just go and build all of these systems because we don't have the people to build them. We don't have the people to do this kind of software development and to do this data engineering work. I just want to really reiterate that is 100% not the case. And if you take the effort to like make these kinds of programs and like go out and find these people, like, I think you're going to be absolutely overwhelmed with the quantity and the quality. From what I've seen, like just in the past 2 years that I've been working at AI2C, the quality of work that's generated from the people who are in green suits versus the quality of work that we are paying other organizations outside the Army to do is like night and day. Griffin's a great example. Like probably the most successful project at AI2C in terms of like getting out into the force and getting something useful out into the force. We don't need to be spending all this money to like necessarily farm out to outside organizations that are far more expensive and like probably in a lot of cases like outside the scope of like what we can pay for in the Army. I think we need to like focus more inward and develop the talent that we have in-house already.
Yes, I love that. And for us infantrymen that listen to this kind of stuff, that would be like the equivalent of me paying $100,000 for somebody to teach my soldiers how to shoot a pistol.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas who can teach my soldiers how to shoot a pistol better than anybody? Sergeant Major Harrison. That's who. Like the first sergeants. They know because he has hours upon hours upon hours of shooting a pistol. And you know how much that costs us? Nothing. He already works with us. And the soldiers loved hearing from Sergeant Major Harrison on how to use a pistol. Yeah. Like learn from your squad leader. And if the squad leader doesn't know how to do it, all the way back to what Remi said 2 hours ago, which is we failed that sergeant if he doesn't know how to use a pistol and he doesn't know how to train his soldiers how to use a pistol. And those things are comparable. Everything you just said, it is in some way, shape, or form happening in our Army. Remi?
I'll put it a little more strongly than I think Abby did. I think that we in the Army need to be the ones to build the solution. I think that it needs to be people who are still in uniform, not just because they understand the system, but because they have skin in the game. I'm not going to make a bad HR system because I have to live with it. If IPSA takes 20 minutes to load and I only get it 50% of the time, like I have to live with that too. I want to have the developers have their skin in the game too. And I think that we have proven that we can build the talent. We're still working on getting that talent in a place that it can be effective.
Yeah.
Related to that.
That might be a whole other conversation.
Yeah. And I think this.
No, it is.
Empathize with as a leader of an organization. We can save this for another time, but one of the big things.
No, say it because you gave me 2 out of the 3. So just give me the one on leaders. Like, what are the benefits to doing what you just said for leaders in our Army? I skin in the game was it for the Army? It's people inside our Army. It's having skin in the game. You're not going to make a bad HR system because you have to live with it. And then you said benefits for the people. Abby said it, which was people are inspired because they're getting to do it. They're getting to do what they love to do and put these systems together for the people that they like working with. And so what is it for the leaders?
They can lead.
Yeah, I think you free your leaders up.
You give them a chance to lead. And
they're not constantly just trying to figure out what's going on because we have to have everyone there in a meeting to verbally say what's going on in their area of expertise. The data is ready and available. And I think we'd be a better Army. We would be a happier Army. I think people would stay in because they would deal with less absurd bloat. They would feel like when they put in a hard day of work in the Army, it wasn't to do a meaningless task. It was because I'm tired at the end of the day because I spent 6 hours with soldiers on a range, or I spent 6 hours doing tactical planning, which a machine can't do. But I didn't spend 6 hours just moving data from one repository to another repository that will expire in a week so I can do it again. There's huge potential to make the Army a really cool place to be and a place that people would stay because they felt like their effort and their ability and their sacrifice was all put towards something.
Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts and better yet demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky on your mind.